You're listening to Reddits for Sleep. Tonight's episode is a gentle journey through the stories that tug at the heart. These emotional tales remind us of the fragile moments in life. Breathe deeply and let each story guide you to stillness. Story 1. I found my dad's secret letters to my late mom. After my father passed, I returned to my childhood home for the first time in nearly 6 years. It had been sitting quiet and empty for a few weeks now. The air inside smelled faintly of old wood, the kind that wraps around your memory and doesn't let go. Dust danced lazily in the sunbeams peeking through the curtains. It didn't feel eerie, just still. I wasn't ready to be there, but the estate lawyer said we needed to begin sorting things. The house wasn't huge, just a 2-bedroom on the edge of town, but it held decades of family history. I didn't know where to start, so I began with the small things. A drawer here, a closet there, gentle beginnings. In the master bedroom, tucked away at the back of his closet, behind some winter coats and an old shoebox of receipts, I found a worn leather pouch tied with string. Inside were letters, dozens of them, maybe more, each one in a white envelope, hand-addressed to my mother. My mother had died when I was 12, cancer, quick and cruel. I remember my dad didn't talk much for a long time afterward. He still made breakfast, still drove me to school, still asked about my homework. But his eyes always looked far away, like he was looking at something only he could see. I sat cross-legged on the carpet and opened the first letter. It was dated exactly 1 month after her death. My dearest Ellie, it began, in his neat, looping handwriting. I made your tea this morning. I still get the water just right, even though I always forget how long to steep it. Your mug still sits on the counter like it's waiting for your hands. Sometimes I forget you're not coming back. I kept reading. Each letter was written a month apart. There were over 100 of them. Some were short, just a few lines about the weather, or how our garden was doing. Others were longer. Stories about me growing up. My first middle school dance, the time I broke my arm falling off the swing, a birthday party I had forgotten. But he hadn't. And each one ended the same way. I miss you. I'll always write. Over the next few weeks, I came back to the house every day just to read a few more. I didn't take them home. I wasn't ready for that. Instead, I'd sit cross-legged on the same old carpet, let the light filter through the blinds, and get lost in his words. One letter stood out more than the rest. It was dated the night before my high school graduation. Ellie, he wrote. She wore your favorite color today. That deep lavender you said made her look like the sky before a storm. I think you'd be proud of her. She's grown into someone kind, someone thoughtful. You know, she still says goodnight to your photo before bed, even though she pretends not to when I'm watching. She got a scholarship. I know we talked about how she'd go far. But it's hard, Elle. Hard to imagine this house without her. Harder still to do it without you. Sometimes I rehearse what I'll say tomorrow. Something fatherly, inspiring, but honestly, I just want to hold her hand and not let go. I hope you're proud of both of us. Love always, M. After reading that letter, I cried for the first time in months. It wasn't a dramatic, chest-heaving sob, just soft tears. The kind that slide down your cheeks quietly, almost shyly, the kind that feel like they've been waiting. I started writing letters too. At first I wrote them to Mom, just like Dad had. I told her about work, about the man I was dating, about how scared I was to let anyone in. And then I started writing to him too. Hi, Dad, I'd write. I finally painted the guest room like you always meant to. I used that soft gray you liked from the hardware store samples. You'd be pleased. It only took me 2 coats. I think I'm starting to understand why you kept writing. It helps. It did help, more than I expected. About a month after I found the letters, I made a decision. I would keep the house. Not out of obligation or guilt, or because it was easier than selling. but because I finally felt close to them here, not just in memories, but in presence, in the quiet creak of the floorboards, in the tea mug still resting on the counter, in the letters tucked safely in their pouch. I had the leather pouch restored, nothing fancy, just cleaned and reinforced so it wouldn't fall apart. I bought a wooden box to keep it in, lined it with soft fabric, and placed it in what used to be their bedroom closet. It felt right to leave it there. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I sit by the window with the letters in my lap, rain tapping gently against the glass. I read one or two, even though I've read them all by now. I never get tired of hearing his voice through ink and paper. And I keep writing too, just like he did. One letter every month. Not because I'm trying to hold on to the past, but because it reminds me how deeply we can love, even in silence, even in absence. In that sometimes grief doesn't need to shout, it just needs space to breathe. I miss you. I'll always write. Story 2. The neighbor who always left a porch light on. When I moved into my first apartment, I didn't know a single soul in the neighborhood. It was a small, quiet street, just outside the city, a little row of townhouses, each with a square porch, a flower bed out front, and an old oak tree lining the sidewalk. Peaceful, affordable, exactly what I needed after leaving my job and ending a long-term relationship within the same exhausting month. I settled in quickly. I kept to myself, unpacked slowly, and tried to breathe a little deeper. My world had been loud for so long. The silence here felt like rest. That's when I started noticing the porch light. It belonged to the house across from mine. A pale yellow light, glowing faintly through dusk, through midnight, through dawn. It never turned off. Not once. At first, I thought it was a timer mistake, or maybe an electrical issue. But every other light in the house turned off at night except that one. Every day, without fail, it clicked on around sunset and stayed glowing well into the next morning. The house belonged to an older woman. I'd seen her only once watering a row of perfectly arranged potted plants on her steps. Short gray hair, gentle posture, cardigan even in the heat. She didn't look up when I passed, but I offered a polite wave anyway. She didn't wave back. Weeks passed. I got into a routine morning coffee, freelance work during the day, evening walks. I didn't have many friends nearby, so I found comfort in small rituals. One of them was my window view of the porch light. Every night, around the time I brushed my teeth, I'd glance outside. The warm glow across the street always greeted me, steady and unchanged. It became a kind of quiet company. Oddly comforting, like someone else was still awake. And then one night, curiosity got the better of me. I was returning from the grocery store and saw her sitting on her porch, a soft blanket on her lap, a mug in her hands. The porch light hummed gently above her. I hesitated at the gate. "Hi," I said softly, not wanting to startle her. She looked up. Her eyes were pale, clouded slightly with age, but steady. "Evening," she said. Her voice was gentle, like the rustle of leaves. I nodded towards the porch light. I've always wondered, does it stay on for a reason? She looked at it, then back at me. There was a long pause, and I almost apologized for asking. Then she said, "It's for my husband." I stayed quiet, sensing there was more. "He used to work the late shift," she said. "Back when the factory was still running. Wouldn't get home till after midnight. So I'd leave the light on for him. Every night, just in case he forgot his keys or needed to see the steps." She smiled faintly, more with her eyes than her lips. "Old habits?" she added, looking back at the mug in her hands. "I'm sorry," I said softly. "Did he, pass away?" She nodded once. "About 10 years ago now." "And you still leave the light on?" "Always. she said. I suppose it just feels right. Like he's still on his way home. After that night, I noticed her more often. We didn't speak much, but when we did, it was always in soft, lingering moments, like leaves floating down in slow autumn air. Sometimes, I'd bring her small things from the store. She'd leave baked goods on my steps in return. Lemon shortbread, molasses cookies, sometimes just a single warm roll wrapped in wax paper. Her name was Margaret. She'd lived on the street for 42 years. She had one son who lived out of state and called every Sunday. Her knees ached in the winter. She liked blue hydrangeas, slow jazz, and old poetry. But the thing I remember most is the way she'd always glance at the porch light when she stepped outside, like checking if it was still doing its job. Still standing guard. One rainy night in early spring, I came home late after a long drive. I looked up at Margaret's porch, and for the first time, the light was off. Just dark, quiet, and dark. I stared for a long while. Something felt out of place, like a favorite picture frame that had been turned just slightly. The next morning, there was an ambulance outside her house. Margaret passed peacefully in her sleep that night. Her son came to sort her belongings. I offered to help him carry boxes and clean up the porch. He was kind, but quiet. Said he didn't know many of the neighbors. Said he'd always meant to visit more. When he packed the last of her things into the back of his car, he turned to look at the porch one last time. I don't know what made me say it. But I told him, she always kept the light on for your dad. He smiled gently, like the memory had caught him off guard. Yeah, he said. She never stopped. Then he closed the trunk and drove away. That night, I left my porch light on. Just for a while, not out of superstition or sadness, but because it felt like someone should. And the night after that, I did it again. A few days later, I noticed the neighbor 2 houses down had left theirs on too. Then another. Soon, without planning, nearly every porch on our street had a little yellow light glowing each night. Not bright, not showy, just enough to be seen. Enough to be remembered. I still live on that street. I eventually got a cat, took up journaling, and even started planting my own hydrangeas in the spring. But no matter how life changes, I never forget to flip the porch light on at dusk. I don't think of it as mourning. I think of it as a small kindness. A signal to anyone out there wandering, returning, remembering that someone is still home. And the light is still on. Story 3. The birthday card that arrived 25 years late. It was an ordinary Tuesday when I found the envelope in my mailbox. A small, cream-colored envelope with my full name, handwritten on the front. Lillian Thompson. No return address, no indication of who sent it. Just a faded stamp and a postmark dated from 1999. At first, I thought it was a mistake, some lost piece of junk mail someone recycled as a prank. But when I opened it and saw the handwriting inside, my breath caught in my chest. It was my father's handwriting. My dad passed away in 2007. He was never a very expressive man, but he always made an effort on birthdays. Even during his long business trips, he'd send a card ahead of time, usually something with a pun and a corny joke. He signed them all the same way. Love you more than peanut butter? Dad. This card was different. The envelope was fragile at the edges, the ink slightly blurred from time. Inside was a folded card with a painted sunflower and the words, "Happy 12th birthday, Lily," in silver cursive. I turned it over in my hands before opening it. The message inside was short. To my Lily Bean. I know I missed the party this year. I'm sorry. Work's been busy, but that's never an excuse. You deserve more than that. I hope you had your favorite cake and danced to that song you love. I promise I'll make it up to you. Pinky swear. Love you more than peanut butter. Dad. P.S. I hid your gift behind the old record player. Shh, don't tell Mom. I sat down right there on the porch, card trembling in my hands. I was 37 years old. That birthday he mentioned, my 12th, was the year he missed it because of an unexpected trip to Tokyo. I remembered crying about it for days, even though he'd tried to call. Back then, phone lines were bad, and time zones worse. It felt like he'd forgotten me. I never got that card. I never got any gift behind the record player, either. I'd assumed he just didn't do anything that year. And now, 25 years later, the truth had shown up in my mailbox like a ghost in daylight. I don't know where the card had been all that time. Maybe it fell behind a sorting machine. Maybe it was tucked inside another envelope and only just resurfaced in some dusty mailroom box. Whatever the case, the postmark was real. August 16th, 1999. And the ink, though faded, was undeniably his. I held the card to my chest and closed my eyes. It was like hearing his voice again, just for a moment. A moment I didn't know I still needed. That night, I dug through the attic and found the old record player he gave Mom for their anniversary in '92. It hadn't been used in years, the kind with polished walnut wood and brass knobs. I pulled it out of the box and carefully lifted the back panel. Tucked between the wood and the wires was a small, wrapped box, dusty but intact, wrapped in birthday paper with tiny cats and party hats. I stared at it for a long time before unwrapping it. Inside was a silver charm bracelet. Simple, delicate. A tiny sunflower charm dangled from the middle, the same kind printed on the card. I don't think I've ever cried the way I did that night. Not from sadness, not exactly. It was more like a slow, aching release, like a tight knot in my chest had finally come loose after all these years. The kind of grief you forget you're still carrying until it suddenly lifts. And with it came peace. I wore the bracelet the next day, then the next. After a while, I stopped taking it off. It wasn't about fashion or sentiment, it was something else, like a whisper from the past, telling me I'd been loved even when I didn't know it. In the weeks that followed, I started remembering little things I had long buried. The way Dad used to leave sticky notes in my lunchbox with bad puns, the way he'd dance like a goof to embarrass me at school pickup, the way his tie always had some kind of food stain on it because he was too busy to eat slowly. I had held on to the idea that he was always too busy, that he chose work over family. But the card, the gift, it told a different story. He had remembered. He had tried. And somehow, through the strange grace of time and coincidence, that effort reached me, a full quarter century later. I started writing a blog post about it. Just a small piece for a personal journal I hadn't touched in years. I didn't expect anyone to read it, but within days, the post had thousands of views. People started sharing their own stories of delayed letters, unopened gifts, lost phone messages recovered years later, little echoes of love resurfacing from the quiet corners of time. One comment in particular stayed with me. Sometimes the universe holds our messages until we're finally ready to receive them. I think that's what happened with the birthday card. Maybe 12-year-old me would have just ripped it open, said thanks, and tossed it aside. But 37-year-old me read every word like it was stitched into the sky. A month later, I framed the card and placed it on my bookshelf next to a photo of my dad, the one where he's laughing so hard his eyes are half closed. The sunflower bracelet rests on a small porcelain dish nearby, but I still wear it when I need to feel Brave. When my niece turned 12 this year, I wrote her a card, handwritten, with a punny joke and a small sunflower sticker inside. She texted me, "This is the cutest card I've ever gotten." I told her to keep it somewhere safe, because you never know what small thing will mean the world later. Sometimes love takes the long way home, and sometimes the mailbox becomes a time machine. All you have to do is open the envelope. Story 4. The man who returned the same library book for 40 years. Every Wednesday, at exactly 3 p.m., Mr. Harold Fletcher would walk through the front doors of the Cedarwood Public Library, nod politely to the front desk, and head straight for the nonfiction section. He wore the same outfit nearly every week, a soft gray sweater vest, brown slacks, and a herringbone flat cap. His movements were unhurried, practiced. He knew every creaky floorboard and which corner got the best sunlight. And in all the years I worked at that library, he checked out the same book. Every single time. It was a slim hardcover called Gardens of the English Countryside. At first, we all assumed he simply forgot he'd borrowed it before. I mean, it's easy enough to forget a book if it didn't make much of an impression. But the odd part was, he never kept the book. He always returned it exactly 1 week later, in perfect condition, and then immediately checked it out again. He did this like clockwork, week after week, season after season. Some of the younger staff joked about it. "Maybe he's trying to memorize the whole thing," someone once said. Another time, a student volunteer asked me, "Isn't that a bit obsessive?" But the truth was, I didn't find it strange at all. There was something about Harold's ritual that felt deeply peaceful, like watching someone tend to a quiet corner of the world that only they understood. One rainy afternoon, curiosity finally got the better of me. I had just finished restocking the large print mysteries when I saw Harold at the checkout desk, gently sliding the familiar green book across the counter. I smiled. "Back again, for your gardens." He chuckled softly. Hard to stay away. I hesitated, then asked, "If you don't mind me asking, what is it about this book? I've noticed you check it out every week." He looked down at the cover for a long moment, running his fingers lightly over the edges. Then he said, "It belonged to her." I blinked. "Her?" He nodded. "My wife, Margaret. It was her favorite book." He paused as if letting the memory settle. She used to come here every Saturday, same table by the back window. She'd sit for hours with a cup of weak tea and this book on her lap. Marked her favorite pages with little bits of tissue paper. Never wrote in the margins, said books deserve to stay clean. She was a gardener, you see, roses, mostly. Could make anything grow. I stayed quiet. The rain tapped gently on the skylight above us. She passed in 83, he said finally. Brain aneurysm. No warning. One moment we were planning which tulips to plant, the next, his voice trailed off. I came here the week after the funeral, found her book on the shelf, opened it to page 47, the one with the climbing roses over the stone arch. Her favorite. I sat there and stared at it until closing time. He smiled faintly, not with his mouth, but with his eyes. I've been borrowing it ever since. For a long time after that, I saw Harold differently. He wasn't just regular anymore. He was a quiet guardian of memory. Each time he took that book home, it wasn't for the text, it was to keep something sacred alive. He told me once that he never opened it anymore, said he didn't need to. "I've seen every page," he said. But having it near me, it feels like she's still around, like she just stepped outside to water the garden. Years passed. Cedarwood Library changed over time. We updated our checkout system, switched from paper cards to digital scanners, renovated the West Wing, got new chairs and better lighting. But Harold never changed. He was our Wednesday ritual, our steady note in the week. Then one winter, he stopped coming. At first, we assumed it was the weather. Snowstorms had rolled in early that year, and Harold always walked with a cane. But when 2 weeks passed without any sign of him, I called the number listed on his library card. No answer. Eventually, I asked around town. It didn't take long to learn the news. Harold had passed away quietly in his sleep. No surviving family, no big funeral. Just a few neighbors and an obituary tucked into the back page of the local paper. The library felt different after that. Wednesdays felt quieter, emptier. The spot where he always sat remained unclaimed for weeks. In the book, Gardens of the English Countryside sat alone on the shelf for the first time in decades. One of the interns asked if we should retire it. "He's the only one who ever checked it out," she said. I almost said yes. It was old. The spine was soft. The edges of the dust jacket had worn smooth. But when I opened it to inspect it, a small slip of paper fluttered out. It was a tiny, square piece of tissue, nearly transparent. It marked page 47. The Climbing Roses over the Stone Arch. I closed the book gently and held it to my chest. Instead of retiring it, we placed it in a glass display case near the front entrance, with a small plaque underneath. In memory of Harold Margaret Fletcher, some love stories are quiet. This was one of them. Every now and then, I'll see someone stop to read the plaque. Some linger at the case longer than others. Once, I noticed an older woman resting her hand against the glass, as if offering thanks. And once a year, on the last Wednesday in April, we place a single white rose on the table by the back window, Margaret's favorite flower. We never announced that part publicly. But somehow, someone always brings the rose. To most people, a book is just pages and ink. But for Harold, it was something else entirely. A link across time. A way to hold on to love. A promise folded into a borrowed cover. 40 years of the same book. 40 years of remembering. And that, I think, is one of the quietest and most beautiful things I've ever seen. Love doesn't always shout. Sometimes it simply returns the same book again and again, just to keep the memory close. Story 5. The grocery list in the old wallet. It started with a drawer. The kind everyone has. The one filled with old batteries, mismatched keys, dried-up pens, and little scraps of forgotten life. After my grandfather passed away, it fell to me to help clean out his apartment. He had lived alone for the last 7 years, ever since Grandma passed. He never moved out of their old place, said the light in the kitchen was just right, and he liked being close to the bakery they used to walk to together on Sundays. The apartment was neat, but it held decades of history in its quiet corners. A clock that ticked one beat too slow, photographs slightly curled at the edges, a radio tuned permanently to classical music. And the drawer. It was in the hallway console, narrow, old-fashioned, with a brass handle that squeaked when you pulled it. Inside, I found the usual clutter. Receipts, an old watch that had long since stopped, a keychain from a gas station that no longer existed, and, at the very back, a wallet, leather, cracked with age, brown turned almost black with the oils of time. I almost didn't open it. It felt private, as if, somehow, even in death, it was something I wasn't meant to touch. But curiosity and the quiet weight of grief made my hands move anyway. The wallet was nearly empty. There was no cash, just an expired driver's license, a faded library card, and an old photo of Grandma, standing in a garden, smiling like she knew a secret. Tucked behind the photo was a folded, yellowed piece of paper. It was soft from being handled, creased perfectly into quarters. I unfolded it. At first, it looked like nothing. Just a grocery list. Written in a delicate cursive hand I instantly recognized from old birthday cards and recipe books. It was hers, Grandma's handwriting. The list read, milk, eggs, flour, cinnamon, apples, candles, don't forget, vanilla extract, ice cream, your favorite, not mine. There was a tiny heart drawn next to the last line. I sat down on the floor, right there in the hallway. The grocery list wasn't dated, but I didn't need a date. This wasn't just any shopping list. This was that day. The birthday. When I was 11, we had a big family dinner at my grandparents' house. I remember running through the backyard with my cousins while Grandma baked an apple cake from scratch, the one with cinnamon and brown sugar folded between the layers. I remember Grandpa forgetting the candles and rushing out at the last minute, returning with a mismatched pack of blue and white ones from a corner store. He came in, laughing, a little out of breath, holding up the bag like a trophy. The ice cream was mint chocolate chip his favorite, not mine. And here it was, the list. The one Grandma must have handed him that morning, probably while tying her apron and reminding him for the 10th time not to forget the candles. He had kept it. All this time. Tucked safely behind her photo, like a small, quiet monument. I wonder how often he looked at it. Maybe on lonely evenings when the apartment felt too quiet. Maybe on days when her perfume still clung to the back of the closet. Maybe never. Maybe it was just enough to know it was there, folded, kept, remembered. The kind of memory not told aloud, the kind carried silently. I put the list back into the wallet and held it for a long time. Grief is strange. It doesn't always show up in the big moments, the funerals, the speeches, the empty chairs at holidays. Sometimes it arrives folded into a grocery list. Sometimes it lives in a drawer you haven't opened in years. And sometimes it softens you. It is the rest of the cleanup went slowly. I sorted photos, donated old coats, boxed up books and knickknacks. I played his radio one last time, letting the soft piano fill the empty air. But I kept the wallet. I didn't tell anyone about the list. Not at first. It felt like a whisper meant just for me. Weeks later, I framed it. Pressed the list between two pieces of glass, with the photo tucked beside it, Grandma in the garden, forever, mid-laugh. I hung it in my kitchen, next to the spice rack. Now and then, I glance at it when I'm cooking, especially when I'm baking. Sometimes, I even buy cinnamon and apples, when I don't need them. Once, I made the cake from memory. It didn't taste quite the same. But the smell, that warm, nostalgic sweetness, filled the apartment the same way it used to. Years have passed now. I've started my own family. My daughter's middle name is Rose, after Grandma. Every year on her birthday, we make the apple cake together. She thinks the recipe came from a book. Someday, I'll tell her about the list. About how love can live in the smallest things. About how a man kept a grocery list for 40 years, not because he needed it, but because it reminded him of a day when everything was whole. Memory isn't always loud. Sometimes it's folded in a wallet. Sometimes it's cinnamon and candles. And sometimes it's just knowing someone once chose your favorite ice cream, even when it wasn't theirs. Story 6, the elderly piano teacher and the student who never came back. For more than 50 years, Miss Eleanor taught piano in a sunlit room at the back of her house. The room smelled faintly of lavender and old wood, warmed by the slow tick of a grandfather clock in the corner. Lace curtains swayed softly in the breeze that came in through the cracked window panes, and framed photos lined every surface, small black and white portraits of students past, some smiling awkwardly in recital clothes, others candid, caught mid-laugh. She taught everyone. The neighbor's son, who couldn't sit still for more than 10 minutes, the girl who never quite learned to read music but had perfect pitch, the boy who brought her daffodils every spring, even after he stopped lessons. They came and went, as children do. Some returned as adults just to say hello, others sent postcards, a few disappeared entirely. But there was always one she remembered more than most. His name was Thomas. He started lessons in the fall of 2002, a quiet, polite boy with large brown eyes and hands a little too big for his age. He was 11. He showed up with a second-hand keyboard under one arm and a dog-eared notebook under the other. From the start, he was different. Not the most gifted, at least. Not in the traditional sense. His rhythm was inconsistent, his technique messy. But there was something in the way he played. He leaned into every note like he meant it, like he was trying to speak through the keys. He asked thoughtful questions. Stayed late. Listened carefully when she played and always tried to imitate the exact phrasing. Week after week, he returned. Rain or shine. Once, even with a bandaged wrist. I can still use my left hand, he insisted. They worked through the beginner books, then intermediate ones, then pieces that were far too advanced for him, but which he tackled anyway with stubborn joy. He never performed in the recitals. Too shy, he said, but she suspected it was something deeper, maybe fear of being seen, of being vulnerable. Still, he never missed a lesson. Until he did. It was an early winter afternoon, and the sky had just begun to cloud. Eleanor waited by the window, her kettle warming on the stove. She'd started a new piece for him, Clair de Lune. He had begged to try it, even though she warned him it was far above his level. She waited, but he didn't come. No phone call, no message. Just an empty hour and a slowly cooling cup of tea. She assumed something had come up. Illness, a family emergency, perhaps a sudden schedule change. These things happened. But the next week, he didn't come either. Or the next. Or the next. She called the number she had on file, but it was disconnected. She wrote a short letter and mailed it to the only address she knew. Weeks passed. No reply. Eventually, she stopped trying. The years rolled forward. Seasons changed. Other students came and went. The photos on the piano multiplied. But Thomas's absence remained a soft ache, like a note left unresolved at the end of a melody. One spring afternoon, almost 2 decades later, Eleanor sat by the open window in her music room, polishing the keys of her old upright piano. Her movements had slowed over the years, her fingers thinner, veins more visible beneath translucent skin. She didn't teach much anymore, only a few neighborhood children, and only when her arthritis allowed. Outside, the cherry trees were blooming. That's when she heard the knock. Soft, almost hesitant. She opened the door and blinked into the sunlight. Standing on the porch was a man in his early 30s. He had dark, tousled hair and kind eyes that looked strangely familiar. "Miss Eleanor?" he asked. She nodded, puzzled. "Yes." He smiled a little sheepishly, a little sadly. "It's me, Thomas." She hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in so long. There was a silence between them, the kind that exists only when time has passed unevenly for two people. Then she stepped aside and let him in. They sat at the kitchen table with tea between them. He looked older, of course, tired maybe, but there was a gentleness in his voice that she remembered instantly. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly, "for disappearing." She said nothing. "I didn't want to," he continued, "but things got complicated." He explained slowly. His family had moved away unexpectedly after his father lost his job. There was no chance to say goodbye. Things were chaotic. He was angry, confused. They'd moved 3 towns over, then again 6 months later. The years blurred. He lost the notebook, then the keyboard. But he never forgot the lessons. Or her. I kept playing, he said, as best I could, mostly by ear. I saved up for a digital piano eventually. I never got very good, but it helped, especially when things were hard. She smiled gently. You were always good, just not in the way schools measure. He nodded. I figured that out eventually. He stood and moved toward the piano, hesitating slightly before touching the keys. With slow fingers, he began to play. It wasn't perfect, a few wrong notes, a rushed passage here and there, but she recognized it instantly. Claire de Lune. The piece he never got to learn. He had taught himself. She listened, eyes closed, letting the melody wash over the room like sunlight after rain. When he finished, the last note hanging delicately in the air, she opened her eyes and smiled. I always knew you'd come back, she said. That day, he stayed for hours. They played duets, laughed about old times, talked about music and memory and life. Before he left, he pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. I found this a few years ago, he said, tucked inside a book I used to carry around. It was the lesson plan she'd written for him all those years ago, in her neat cursive, faded with age. He had kept it. After he left, she added one more photo to her shelf. It was taken at the front door, just before he walked away, the spring sunlight casting a golden glow around them both. She labeled it with his name and the year. Beneath it, she wrote, he found his way back. Some students come and go. Some leave quietly. But the music we share, with them the lessons, the memories they linger, like the soft echo of a song played long ago. And sometimes, if we're lucky, they return. Story 7. The Lost Dog That Stayed Just One Night. It was a cold evening in late October when the dog first appeared. I'd just gotten home from work, tired and carrying a bag of groceries, when I saw him sitting at the end of my driveway, a medium-sized mutt, mostly black, with a bit of tan around the face and paws, and deep brown eyes that looked too intelligent for a stray. He didn't bark, didn't whine, just watched me. I paused. He didn't have a collar. I took a cautious step forward. He didn't flinch or run. He simply stood up, tail wagging gently, and followed me to the porch like we'd done this 100 times. I opened the door, expecting him to stop, but he sat there quietly, patiently, as if waiting for an invitation. And, for some reason, I gave it. I live alone. Just me and a couple of plants I try not to kill. The house is small, 1 bedroom, creaky floors, chipped paint on the banister. Nothing special, but it's mine. Quiet, predictable. I hadn't had a pet since childhood. I told myself I didn't have the time, or the energy, or the space. But there was something about this dog. The way he patted in like he belonged. The way he curled up on the living room rug, sighed once, and closed his eyes like he'd finally reached somewhere safe. I set the groceries down and brought him a bowl of water. He drank, then went back to sleep. I made dinner soup and bread and tossed him some scraps. He accepted them politely, then returned to his spot. Calm, still, content. I figured I'd call the local shelter in the morning, but for that night, he stayed. That evening felt warmer than most. I read a book in the armchair while he dozed nearby. Occasionally he'd stretch or shift, ears twitching at some far-off sound. Once I caught him watching me, not in a nervous way, but like he was studying me, remembering something. When I went to bed, he followed. He didn't climb onto the bed, just lay beside it, chin resting on his paws, breathing slow and steady. I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember the feeling like something lonely had been filled, even if only a little. In the morning, he was still there. I gave him some toast crusts, and he wagged his tail like it was a feast. I took a photo of him on my phone and posted it to a neighborhood group. Found dog. Showed up last night. No collar. Very sweet. Anyone missing him? Then I sat on the porch with my coffee while he sniffed around the yard. He never strayed far. A couple of neighbors messaged me no one recognized him. One woman offered to take him if I couldn't keep him. I wasn't sure how I felt about that. I'd started calling him Buddy. Simple. Temporary. He followed me back inside as if he already knew the house. Around noon, I drove to the vet to check for a microchip. He sat calmly in the passenger seat, ears perked, watching the world go by. At one red light, he looked up at me and licked my hand. It shouldn't have meant anything, but somehow it did. At the clinic, the tech scanned him. Nothing. No chip, no tags, no record. He's healthy, she said. Sweet boy. Probably a runaway. Or someone left him behind. I nodded. I'll keep him for now. She smiled. Looks like he chose you anyway. That night, something changed. He was more restless. Pacing near the door, sniffing the corners of the room. Once, he barked a low, uncertain sound that seemed more question than alarm. Looking for home? I asked him. He looked back at me, then walked over and pressed his head against my leg. We fell asleep the same way, me in bed, him beside it. But when I woke up the next morning, he was gone. The door was shut. No signs of struggle, no mess, just absence. I searched the yard, the street, called his name, checked with neighbors. Nothing. No prints, no sightings. It was as if he'd never been there at all. Just a bowl on the floor, a photo in my phone, an impression in the rug where he had slept. Days passed. I kept checking the neighborhood group. No new posts, no one asking about him. I left food on the porch one night, just in case. In the morning, it was untouched. Eventually, I stopped leaving the light on. But something lingered. A week later, I got a letter. No return address, just a single sheet of paper, typed. It read, "Thank you for taking care of him. He was never lost, only passing through. He finds those who need him, and when they're ready, he moves on. Consider the visit a gift. Some goodbyes are just beginnings in disguise." That was it. I read it twice. 3 times. Then I folded it and tucked it into the drawer by the bed. I never saw Buddy again. But now and then, on cold October nights, I hear a soft shuffle outside, a rustle in the leaves, a presence just out of sight that makes the house feel a little less empty. And when I go to bed, I still leave a space on the rug beside me, just in case. Some visitors don't stay long. Some come to remind us that kindness still exists, even in silence. And sometimes the smallest moments one night, one stray, can leave behind the quietest, most lasting warmth. Story 8. The Janitor Who Left Notes. My first job out of college was at a small public elementary school nestled in the suburbs, the kind of place with faded murals on the hallway walls, and decades-old linoleum floors that squeaked no matter how careful you walked. I was 23, nervous, eager, the youngest teacher in the building by at least a decade. I taught 3rd grade, and most of the time, I felt like I was barely staying afloat. Lesson plans, parent meetings, playground squabbles, lost teeth, forgotten lunches, and an endless sea of paperwork. But I remember the janitor more than anything. Mr. Frank. He was an older man, maybe in his late 60s, with kind eyes and a permanent stoop in his posture. Always wore a blue work shirt, with his name embroidered, in cursive across the chest. He moved slowly, pushing his mop bucket from hallway to hallway, with quiet precision. We never had long conversations. He wasn't much of a talker, but every morning when I arrived, always around 6:45, Long before the students, I'd find something waiting on my desk. A note. Sometimes it was a quote, scribbled on a yellow sticky note. You're doing better than you think. Patience grows slowly, but roots deeply. One smile changes more than 10 frowns. Sometimes it was a folded piece of notebook paper with a hand-drawn sketch of a tree, or a lighthouse, or a book with wings. Once, it was just a single word in capital letters. Breathe. At first, I thought maybe someone had left it by accident, but it kept happening, always neatly placed on my desk before I arrived. Always handwritten, always simple, but oddly timely. Like the words knew what kind of day I was about to have. Eventually, I asked around, "Does Mr. Frank leave notes for other teachers?" A few shrugged. One said, "He leaves something for the front office staff sometimes. Cards at Christmas. That's about it." So I tried to catch him. Came in earlier, waited. But somehow, he always managed to slip in and out without a sound. I left a sticky note back one day. "Thank you. Your words help more than you know." He never mentioned it. But the next day, I found a drawing of a tiny boat braving big waves. Underneath, he had written, "The sea is loud, but the sky is patient." The school year rolled on. 3rd grade was hard. Teaching is always hard, but the notes helped. Like little anchors on tough days. Tiny nudges back to center. Then, in mid-April, I didn't find a note. Just an empty desk and silence. The next day, nothing again. And the next. No one said anything, but I noticed the floors weren't as clean. The trash cans weren't emptied. And there was no familiar squeak of his mop bucket in the halls. By the following week, someone else was cleaning the rooms. No one officially announced it, but whispers spread. Mr. Frank had passed away. A heart issue, they said, quietly, at home. No family nearby. No memorial. Just gone. I remember standing alone in my classroom after the kids had gone home that day. The desks were messy. The window was open, letting in the sound of birds from the playground. I sat at my desk and stared at the empty space where the notes used to be. It hit harder than I expected. Maybe because I never got to say thank you out loud. Maybe because no one else seemed to notice just how quietly kind he had been. Or maybe because I realized something. He'd seen me. Not just my job, not just my role, but me. A struggling young teacher trying to do her best in a world that didn't make it easy. And he had left breadcrumbs of encouragement without asking for anything in return. The next morning, I arrived earlier than ever, and opened my desk drawer. Inside, tucked beneath a stack of construction paper, was one final note. A small white envelope. My name written in block letters. Miss Taylor. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a short letter, in the same looping handwriting. If you're reading this, I suppose I'm gone. Don't be too sad. I had a good run, and this little school kept me going longer than the doctors thought I had. You reminded me of my daughter. She was a teacher too. She passed before I did cancer, age 29. You had the same fire, same tired eyes, same kind heart. I left those notes because I knew what she would have needed. I hope they helped. Keep going, Miss Taylor. The world needs you. There was a sketch at the bottom, a candle, gently flickering. I sat at my desk for a long time, crying quietly, smiling too. The next day, I brought in a small corkboard and pinned every note I still had to it. I placed it above my desk, a silent monument to someone who spoke in whispers. Other teachers noticed. One by one, They started pinning their own little notes to it. Words of encouragement, simple drawings, small reminders. It became a tradition. New teachers added to it. Students eventually joined in. We called it Frank's Board. And in the years that followed, I watched it grow a wall of unseen kindness sparked by a janitor most people never really noticed. Not all legacies are loud. Some are written in pencil, left on sticky notes, folded in corners, tucked quietly into drawers. But they stay. Oh, how they stay. Story 9. The empty chair at the cafe. There's a small cafe tucked between a florist and a bookstore on 7th Street. Nothing fancy, just brick walls, mismatched chairs, and the smell of strong coffee and warm pastries that wraps around you the moment you walk in. I've been going there every Saturday for the last 6 years. Always at 8 a.m. Always the same corner table by the window. Always 2 cups of coffee, even though only one gets touched. The baristas don't ask anymore. They just nod, pour the coffee, and leave the second cup untouched on the table. Her name was Margaret. She liked cinnamon rolls, even though she always said they were too sweet. She used to take a bite, then push the rest toward me, shaking her head like she was too dignified for sugar. I always ate the rest. She always smiled when I did. We met in that cafe 10 years ago. I spilled my coffee on her notebook, an accident, nervous hands, too little sleep. She looked up, surprised but not angry. "You owe me a new notebook," she'd said. "I'll buy you 10, I replied. She laughed. I sat down. She never asked me to leave. That table by the window became ours. Weekends turned into routines, then into years. We talked about everything. Books, politics, childhood, favorite smells, hated vegetables, the way sunlight looked different in winter. We argued too, sometimes about nothing, sometimes about everything. But we always came back to that table. 2 coffees, 1 cinnamon roll, easy silence. And then one morning, she wasn't there. She had gone to visit her sister up north, a short trip, just a week. But it stretched into 2, then 3. Then I got the call. Car accident, ice on the road. Didn't make it to the hospital. Just like that, Ray. I didn't go to the cafe for a month. I stayed home, let dishes pile up, let the silence in my apartment grow heavy. But grief, I've found, is like a wound that itches while it heals. You need to scratch it, revisit it, let it breathe. So one Saturday, I went back. The staff had changed. New barista, young, kind, trying not to stare at the man who ordered 2 coffees and drank one in silence. I sat at our table, watched the steam rise from the untouched cup across from me. It hurt, but it also felt right. I kept going. Every Saturday. People came and went, seasons turned, chairs were replaced, menus updated. But I stayed. Me, the table, and the empty chair. The world moved forward, and I stayed in place, not because I was stuck, but because I didn't want to forget how it felt to be beside her. That table had memory, our laughter soaked into the wood, our arguments etched into its corners, our quiet moments stained into its grain. Some places just remember people. A few months ago, something changed. I noticed a young woman, early 20s, maybe watching me from the opposite end of the cafe. Not in a nosy way, just quietly curious. After a few weeks, she came over. "Hi," she said, nervous. "I hope this isn't weird, but I see you here every week, always with 2 coffees. I don't mean to intrude." I smiled. "You're not. Have a seat." She hesitated. "That chair. Is it okay?" I nodded. "It misses being used." So she sat. We talked. Just small things. Weather, books, the smell of the pastries. Her name was Elise. She was a grad student studying literature. She reminded me a little of Margaret, not in looks, but in presence. Thoughtful, kind, a little scattered. When she left, she said, "Thank you for the seat." The next week, she joined me again. And again. Now, every few Saturdays, Elise shares that table with me. She drinks tea, brings a new book each time. We talk sometimes, or sit in companionable silence. There's no replacement happening, no trying to fill a hole. Just two people sharing a space where memory lives. I still order 2 coffees. Sometimes I drink both. Sometimes I leave one untouched. Margaret isn't coming back. I know that. But her presence lingers. In the sunlight that hits that window, just right. In the warm mug between my hands. In the soft hum of conversation around us. In the way Elise sometimes bites her lip before speaking, just like Margaret used to. Grief doesn't ask for permission. It simply arrives, stays, changes shape over time. But in that little cafe on 7th Street, with its mismatched chairs and old brick walls, I've learned something. Love leaves echoes. And if you listen carefully, you can still hear them. In the clink of a coffee cup. In a quiet corner by the window. In an empty chair that never really feels empty. Not all goodbyes are endings. Some are invitations to keep remembering, to keep sitting, to keep sharing the table. Story 10. The man who repaired broken things. There was a man in our town who fixed things. No business sign, no hours, no advertisements. Just a quiet workshop behind an old red brick house near the edge of Maple Street. People called him Mr. Anders. No one knew his first name. No one asked. He wasn't a repairman in the usual sense. He didn't work with a phone number or take payments. He didn't make promises or give estimates. You couldn't make appointments. You just brought him something broken and left it on the small wooden bench outside his door. A week or so later, it would show up on the same bench, whole again. Over the years, I left him many things. A cracked music box my grandmother gave me. A rusted tin toy car from when I was a child. A wooden jewelry box with a busted hinge, one of the last things I had from my mother. Each time, I'd leave a short note with it. If you can fix this, I'd be grateful. And each time, without fail, it would return with no note, no charge, no explanation. Fixed. Perfectly. No one ever saw him do the work. If you walked by in the evening, the lights in his shop would glow soft yellow, like fireflies behind frosted glass. You might hear the faint sound of sanding, or the soft knock of wood, or the tinkling of old clock chimes. But he never came out. Never opened the door. Some said he was a retired clockmaker. Others thought he had once been an engineer, or an artist, or maybe both. But mostly he was just there. One winter, when I was 28, I brought him something different. My father's old pocket watch cracked glass, missing hands, the metal back rusted shut. It hadn't worked in years. He used to keep it in his coat pocket when we'd walk through the park on Sundays. I could still remember the sound it made when he opened it, a tiny click, followed by the softest tick, 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 like time whispered instead of marched. After he passed, I found it in a drawer, forgotten, silent. I placed it on Mr. Anders' bench with a short note. It doesn't have to work again. I just want to remember it as it was. A week passed. Then 2, no watch. I checked the bench every morning before work. Still nothing. Then one day, I found a small envelope instead. Inside was a note. Still working. This one needs more time. Some things do. That was the first time he'd ever written back. Another 2 weeks passed. Then, one snowy morning, the watch was there. Not just repaired, restored. The glass gleamed like crystal. The hands ticked in perfect time. The casing had been polished, but not too much. Just enough to keep the age, the memory. There was a note tucked beneath it. Time can stop, but memory ticks on. Hold it close. I cried, sitting in my car. Not loudly, just a quiet, aching kind of gratitude that fills your chest and presses behind your eyes. After that, I started stopping by more often. Not to leave things, just to look. To walk past the bench. To see what others had left. A chipped mug with a floral pattern. A child's rocking horse, missing one leg. A radio with a snapped antenna and faded knobs. Each one left with a note. Each one returned whole. And always the bench was clean, the items neatly arranged, like someone cared not just about the fixing, but about how things were received. Then, one day, the bench was empty. The door to the shop was closed. The light was off. I waited a few days, then a week, then 2. Nothing changed. Eventually, someone put a small paper sign in the window. Closed. Thank you for everything. No explanation. No farewell. Just closed. The town felt a little different after that. The broken things stayed broken longer. People looked at their worn-out belongings and sighed more often. But something else started to happen too. One morning, I saw a boy, maybe 12, trying to fix the chain on his bicycle outside the library. His fingers were greasy, his face pinched in frustration. I stopped and knelt beside him, showed him how to slip the chain back on. He thanked me. A few days later, I saw the same boy helping a younger kid tie a broken shoelace using a double knot trick. That same week, I noticed a new bench outside the community center. On it, a cracked snow globe with a note that read, "Can someone fix this?" The next morning, it was gone. 2 days later back, fixed. No name, no credit, no explanation. Soon, little benches started showing up all over town. At the park, by the church, behind the grocery store. Each with little items. Toys, tools, trinkets. And each one fixed quietly by someone, sometimes left better than before. Sometimes just made whole again. People started helping each other more. Fixing instead of discarding, mending instead of replacing. Not just things, but conversations, relationships, old wounds. And each time someone helped, they'd sometimes whisper his name. Mr. Anders would have liked this. He taught us how to fix things. No one saw him again. But he was never really gone. He had left us with something better than instructions. He'd given us an example. In a world so quick to throw away, he reminded us that broken isn't the end. That hands can heal. That time, care, and quiet love still matter. And that every repaired thing carries a story, one worth holding on to. Now, when I see something broken, an object, a friendship, a stranger's day, I think of him. The man who repaired broken things. And I ask myself, can I fix this? If not perfectly, at least kindly, at least lovingly, at least with the intention that someone once showed me quietly, without a word. And most times, the answer is yes. If you're still here, I hope these stories helped you drift closer to rest. Let me know which one stood out to you the most. I always love reading your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to Reddits for Sleep so you never miss a night of calm stories. Sleep well, and I'll see you tomorrow.